So yeah, another year, another budget, and as Badenoch just referred to it in Houses of Parliament, was it the nightmare for Christmas or was it the dog that didn't bark? And in truth, it was probably halfway in between. There was no big kind of announcements in there that weren't expected. Obviously, we were expecting an increase in income tax, that didn't really come to any fruition, or did it? I'll come to that in a second. And there was also a few other different bits, but all of which were largely touted in advance. Now, probably the biggest thing that's going to affect practice owners, or indeed associates who trade as a limited company, has been the new increases in tax for those who are taking income from their limited company by way of dividends. So the two lowest rates of dividend tax. So the dividend allowance looks like it's been untouched at £500, but then conversely, the basic rate of dividend tax and indeed the higher rate tax have all increased by 2 percentage points. They haven't touched the additional rate. That's still remaining at 39.35%, but there's also been a 2% increase across income for property income. So if you've got some property investments which aren't in a limited company, and indeed savings income. Now, to put some sort of meat on the bone with that, if you're an associate or indeed a practice owner who's drawing out roughly £130,000 in income, now you're £2,362 a year worse off come the beginning of April. That's what the increase in tax is roughly worth. In addition to that, they have changed, as was again widely touted, changes to salary sacrifice and pensions. Now, the important thing with this is, because it's actually quite hard to legislate these changes, is that this particular change doesn't come until 2029. So it's not an immediate thing. You've still got a little while to take advantage of it. But it means that anything over £2,000 in salary sacrifice, which a lot of people were using to build up their private pension pots, if they weren't benefiting from the NHS pension, will now be subject to both employee and employer national insurance. So as a business owner or someone in charge of your own limited company, that means you'll be paying the 15% employer's NI on it, as well as the employee and national insurance contribution. So you've got roughly a 23% tax rate now on pension contributions, which you on say a pension contribution of £20,000 a year, which you haven't had in the as it stands at the moment. Aside from that, they were probably the two biggest things. There was a few other arrangements to do from a capital gains tax perspective. We obviously had some big announcements last year in terms of putting the wider rate up and changes to BADR, all of which were known last year. So the only change to capital gains tax this year was the abolition of 100% relief if you were selling your business to an employee ownership trust, which isn't very common in dental practice terms, but is common in other areas. Now they've changed that relief from 100% to 50%, which will have obviously quite a big impact if you've got a large business and you were looking forward to that paying no CGT. You will be paying some going forward. Changed the ISA limit, so it was £20,000 in the cash ISA. That's dropped to £12,000, although the overarching ISA allowance remains the same. The whole idea of that is to encourage people to invest in stocks and shares as opposed to cash ISAs. We've also got a freezing of the personal tax thresholds. I mean, they've done that since I think it's 2001, so that was no great 2001, 2013. So that was no great surprise, but they've all been frozen, as has the employer's national insurance contribution threshold. The fuel duty, which again hasn't changed for 16 years, and they are bringing that in. It was touted as a positive because they're not changing it till September. But again, the important thing is there will be a 5p increase on fuel duty from September. Again, as was widely touted, if you die and you've still got money in your self-invested pension pot, so any unspent pension pots will now fall into IHT from April 2027. And then you've got the widely touted mansion tax. So this refers to any properties which are worth more than £2 million. You'll pay a £2,500 a year surcharge going forward. And if the property is worth more than £5 million, you'll pay a £7,500 a year surcharge. Probably the only other big thing that's really going to impact practice owners was actually announced yesterday, and that's changes to the national living wage. Now, the national living wage for people who are aged 21 and older has been £12.21 for the last 12 months. That will increase to £12.71 from the beginning of April. Now, if you put some numbers into that, that means that if you now employ someone for 40 hours a week, and you say that that's going to have a ripple effect down the rest of the payroll, to employ someone now on minimum or national living wage now for 40 hours a week in comparison to last year will now cost £1,227 a year more than than it did do previously. Again, if you're multiplying that by the number of people you say got on your payroll, and let's say, that then if it's say 10 people, and that's now going to cost you an extra £12,227. And then if you're multiplying that by say 7, if you're looking at it in business valuation terms, then you're sort of near to the 100 grand mark in terms of loss in value. But of course, the key thing here is that because it is a 4.1% increase, the counter argument to that is a lot of that can be compensated for in price rises overall. So there wasn't really any giveaways in this budget. The whole thing with this is it just wasn't as bad as we expected it to be. The only giveaway is that they've increased the marriage allowance up by 3.8%. But that is literally the only good thing I can find.